The fire cracked and sputtered as the night wrapped itself around the village like a warm cloth. The air was thick with the sweet scent of roasted plantains and the distant drumming from another gathering across the river. Children, their eyes wide and gleaming like polished cowrie shells, sat cross-legged in a wide circle around the griot, the village's ancient storyteller. His voice, worn smooth by years of telling and retelling the truths of the people, rose into the smoky air like a spell. He leaned forward, tapping his carved walking stick against the ground, and in a voice deep and slow as the great river, he spoke. "Listen, little ones, for tonight I will tell you of a girl whose spirit even fire could not break. A girl whose scars were not curses, but songs, each note a testament that she lived, that she fought, and that she endured." The children inched closer, their little faces lit with anticipation. The griot's skin was like old bark, thick with wrinkles, each line a story of its own. His eyes, cloudy with the mist of age, still burned with the fire of memory. He smiled, showing a mouth missing more teeth than it held, and continued. "There is an old saying from the time when elephants still danced at the river's edge," he said, voice low and rhythmic. "A scar is not a shame, it is a memory of survival. Remember that, my children. Remember it well, for too many grow ashamed of the marks life leaves upon them. But those marks? Oh, they are your drums that beat to the rhythm of everything you have conquered." He paused, letting the wind stir the embers and the children's imaginations alike. One little girl, her hair braided tight with beads that clicked when she moved, whispered, "What was her name, grandfather?" The griot chuckled, a sound like pebbles tumbling in a dry gourd. "Her name was Adana," he said, savoring the name on his tongue. "It means father's daughter, for she was loved dearly once. Born in the village of Mbale, where the earth is red and rich as blood, where the trees whisper the songs of the ancestors, and where the river sings louder than the winds of the desert." He leaned in closer, the firelight painting his face in orange and gold. Adana was a girl like no other. Her laughter could heal a wounded heart, and her smile could light the darkest hut. But life, little ones, does not always smile back. Jealousy, like a hidden snake in the grass, slithered into her world. And from the fire meant to cook yam and cassava, came a pain that sought to silence her beauty. The children gasped, some clutching their own cheeks protectively. The griot nodded solemnly. "Yes, yes." The flames kissed her face, leaving her skin marked by their fierce tongues. Her world turned cold when once it had been warm. The people who had once loved her turned their backs, whispering of omens and curses. He paused again, tapping his stick 3 times against the earth, as if anchoring the heavy words. "But hear me well," he said, his voice gathering strength like a gathering storm. Adana did not break. Even when the villagers would not meet her eyes. Even when her heart, bruised and battered, tried to fold in on itself. Even when the winds of shame tried to blow her spirit away, she planted her feet deep into the soil of her ancestors. She grew stronger, wiser, fiercer. The flames danced higher as if they too were moved by the tale. The griot's voice dropped to a whisper, making the children lean even closer, ears straining. And when the prince came to choose a queen, it was not to the ones with unmarked faces and soft songs that he turned. No. It was to Adana, whose scars sang louder than beauty ever could. It was her story that captured his heart. The old man leaned back, his body creaking like an old tree in the wind. He smiled once more, a soft, knowing smile as he said, "But that, my little ones, is only the beginning." The drums from across the river thudded once, twice, like the beat of a giant heart. And in that moment, under the wide sky sprinkled with 1,000 watching stars, Adana's story, woven from fire and survival, began to unfold once more. In the village of Mbale, where the earth gleamed rich and red beneath the feet and the sun set the world aflame each evening, there lived a girl named Adana, whose laugh could make even the grumpiest elder forget his worries. She ran through the village barefoot, her feet tough and nimble from chasing goats and climbing wild mango trees that bowed heavy with fruit. The trees themselves seemed to lean closer when Adana passed, as if they wished to catch some of her joy for themselves. In the mornings, the air was thick with the scent of roasting groundnuts and the songs of bright-feathered birds swooping overhead. Adana would race the boys to the river, where they would leap from smooth rocks into the cool waters, their laughter mixing with the splashes. The older women scolded her for being too wild, for not walking daintily like a maiden ought to, but they said it with smiles tugging at their mouths, unable to stay stern in the face of her radiant spirit. Adana's beauty was the kind that made strangers stare a little too long. Her skin glowed like polished mahogany, her eyes sparkled with mischief, and her smile, oh her smile, was a thing the village could never get enough of. When she laughed, it rolled out of her belly, pure and free, like the song of the river after a hard rain. Mothers prayed for daughters like her, and young boys grew clumsy trying to impress her, their pride bruised each time she outran them or outwitted them with clever words. But Adana's heart belonged first to her father, Obi, the village's revered storyteller. Every evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the earth, she would sit by his side under the ancient baobab tree at the village center. Obi's voice was a deep drumbeat, his hands painting pictures in the air as he spun tales of mighty warriors, cunning spirits and clever maidens who tricked greedy kings. Adana drank in every word, every gesture, memorizing the way he would lower his voice for suspense or slap his thigh to punctuate a joke. Obi often ruffled her hair and called her his little drum, because her laughter beat through the village louder than any drum skin he had ever heard. He told her she had the spirit of an eagle, bold, sharp, destined to fly higher than the tallest Irako tree. And Adana believed him, believed that the world beyond Mbale held adventures with her name whispered on the wind. At night, long after the fires died down and the last songs faded into the dark, Adana would lie on her straw mat, staring through the small hole in the thatched roof at the spray of stars above. She would imagine walking across the sky, stepping from one bright point to another, visiting far-off lands where the rivers ran silver and the mountains touched the heavens. In her dreams, she wore cloaks woven from moonlight and dined with kings and queens who marveled at her daring stories. Sometimes, when sleep would not come, she would whisper her dreams to the night. One day, she would say, "I will leave Mbale and see the places where the river never dries and the drums beat so loud you feel them in your bones." The stars, ancient and wise, would blink down at her as if promising that her words had not gone unheard. In the seasons when the yams grew fat and the rains were generous, the village would host great festivals, and Adana was always in the thick of them. She could dance longer than anyone, her feet a blur against the dust, her arms slicing through the air like wings. When the drummers played, they would watch her, matching their rhythms to the fire of her steps. Old women clapped and nodded, murmuring to each other that no spirit could resist such a call. Even the animals seemed to favor Adana. Goats would follow her through the market stalls, chickens would cluck and strut proudly when she passed, and the village dogs, usually scrappy and suspicious, would lie at her feet like great lazy kings. Some whispered that perhaps a bit of magic lived inside her, passed down from some forgotten ancestor who had danced with the spirits or sung with the rain itself. Life in Bale was not always easy. There were hard seasons, when the rains failed and the fields cracked open, or when sickness snuck through the village like a thief. But even in those times, Adana's laugh refused to wither. She would find some small joy, a stubborn flower forcing its way through dry earth, a clever trick to steal mangoes from the neighbor's orchard, and share it until it grew big enough to shelter others. Adana was light wrapped in human skin, a song made flesh. And though the winds of change were gathering beyond the hills, whispering of trials and sorrows yet to come, in those golden days in Bale, she was untouchable, invincible. She was the girl of the bright laugh, and the world had not yet learned how hard it would be to silence her song. When the fever came, it came like a thief in the night, silent and cruel. It stole into the village, weaving through the huts, clinging to the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. It found Adana's mother first, and no matter how many herbs the healers brewed or how many prayers were whispered beneath the baobab tree, the fever clung to her with stubborn fingers. Adana sat by her mother's side, holding her frail hand, watching the light in her eyes flicker and dim like a dying flame. When the last breath left her mother's lips, it was as if the color drained from the world all at once. For a long time after the burial, the village seemed quieter, as if the drums themselves were mourning. Adana moved through the days like a ghost, her laughter silenced, her feet heavy. Obi, once so full of stories and songs, sat for hours under the baobab tree, his eyes staring at something only he could see. In the evenings, when the children begged for tales, he would shake his head and turn away, the griot's voice buried under the weight of grief. The elders whispered among themselves, as they always did, that a man without a wife was like a canoe without a paddle. They spoke of balance, of the need for a woman's hand to steady the home, to brew the medicines, to speak to the ancestors in the way only a woman could. It was not long before they came to Obi's hut, bearing gifts of palm wine and solemn words. It was time, they said, for him to marry again. For Adana's sake, they said. A girl needed a mother to guide her into womanhood. And so McKenna came. She arrived on a morning so bright it seemed the sun itself had been reborn. She was beautiful in the way the river looks from far away, shimmering, dazzling, promising. Her skin was smooth as ripe plantain, her smile quick and dazzling, her laugh a soft melody that made the elders nod in approval. She carried herself with the grace of a queen, her wrapper tied perfectly, her beaded necklaces clinking gently as she moved. At first, Adana watched her with wary eyes, but McKenna smiled warmly, cupping Adana's chin in her soft hands and calling her "my daughter," in a voice sweet as honey. She braided Adana's hair with nimble fingers, sang to her as they ground maize together, praised her beauty to any who would listen. For a moment, a tiny flame of hope rekindled in Adana's chest. The village celebrated the new union with songs and feasting. According to tradition, the new wife was led by the elder women into Obi's compound, their feet drumming on the earth in a steady rhythm as they chanted blessings. They smeared McKenna's arms with shea butter, anointed her forehead with river clay, and braided into her hair charms woven from grass and feathers, symbols of fertility, wisdom, and protection. A pot of water was broken at the threshold, the shards scattered like seeds to ensure the household would be fruitful and strong. Children raced around laughing, tossing handfuls of millet into the air like confetti, and the drummers beat a rhythm so wild it set even the shyest feet to tapping. For a while the house seemed alive again. McKenna cooked thick stews fragrant with peppers and groundnut, wove new mats for the floors, and sang as she pounded yam in the courtyard. Obi smiled more, even laughed again, though his eyes still carried the deep sadness that no new wife could banish. But like the river when you draw closer and see the hidden currents, so too did McKenna's true nature reveal itself. The sweetness in her voice began to sour, first in small, almost invisible ways. A sharpness when Adana's braids were not neat enough. A coldness in her eyes when no one else was looking. She no longer called Adana daughter in public, instead correcting her harshly, her words barbed like thorns. If Adana laughed too loudly, McKenna's mouth would tighten, and later there would be punishment, extra chores, missed meals, silent stares that chilled the room. McKenna knew the ways of appearances well. Before the village, she was still the perfect wife, bowing low to the elders, serving Obi with downcast eyes and gentle hands. But behind closed doors, her voice turned sharp as broken shells, her commands cruel and relentless. Adana soon learned to move silently, to swallow her bright laugh, to fold herself into smaller and smaller spaces so as not to provoke the growing storm. Obi, burdened by grief and perhaps blinded by McKenna's outward charms, saw little. When he did see, he convinced himself it was nothing more than the growing pains of a new family learning to live together. After all, he told himself, McKenna had been welcomed according to the ancient rites. The ancestors had been called to bless the union. Surely they would not have allowed a serpent into his home. But the ancestors, it seemed, were silent, and the walls of the once joyful house now whispered warnings that no one wanted to hear. The river ran on, the mango trees bore their fruit, the drums still sounded in the evenings, but for Adana the world had shifted, tilted on an unseen axis. And though she still dreamed at night, the dreams had changed too, growing strange and sharp-edged, filled with shadows that laughed without kindness. It was small things at first, almost too small to name. A pot of stew that tasted bitter no matter how fresh the ingredients. A new wrapper Adana had woven, mysteriously torn to shreds by unseen hands. A simple beaded necklace left on her mat one morning, threaded not with bright joyful colors but with dull, cracked beads smeared faintly with something that smelled like earth and ash. The elders always said that jealousy was like a seed. Feed it with enough bitterness, and it would grow thorns sharp enough to tear through bone. McKenna's smile grew thinner each time the villagers called out greetings to Adana as she passed. "Look at how the sun loves her skin," they would say. "Look at the joy that follows her like a shadow." The old women invited Adana to help stir the festival pots. The young men watched her out of the corners of their eyes, and even the children vied for her attention. Though McKenna draped herself in the finest cloth Obi could buy, though she buttered her words with sweetness in the marketplace, it was Adana the people truly loved. And McKenna could feel it slipping through her fingers like water she could neither drink nor hold. In the evenings, while Obi worked late fixing fishing nets or repairing tools for the hunters, McKenna's eyes followed Adana with a sharpness that prickled the girl's skin. She would find reasons to scold her, to send her out to fetch water from the farthest well, to scrub the courtyard stones until her hands bled. Every smile that Adana received became a stone in McKenna's chest. Every whispered compliment was a flame licking at her pride. McKenna's hatred festered, slow and steady, until it poisoned even the air between them. Sometimes Adana would find strange things tucked beneath her sleeping mat. A scrap of cloth tied with knotted hair, a small carved figure snapped in two, a smear of red clay drawn in the shape of a closed eye. Old signs, old curses meant to steal beauty, to drain vitality. But Adana, heart still strong with the memories of her mother's gentle hands and her father's proud stories, swept the cursed objects into the fire without fear. She would not bow her head to unseen evils, not yet. But hatred does not often stay hidden for long. It builds, brick upon brick, until it must break through. It happened on a night when the moon rose heavy and red, bleeding its strange light over the village. The drums were silent that night, and even the crickets held their breath. McKenna stood by the cooking fire, stirring a pot of thick, bubbling stew. Adana moved carefully around her, gathering wood, keeping her steps light, her eyes lowered. A slip of the hand, a clatter of spilled firewood, and the world tipped into chaos. "You useless child!" McKenna shrieked, her voice sharper than a thorn. Her eyes, once practiced in sweetness, now blazed with naked fury. She snatched Adana by the arm, nails digging cruelly into soft flesh, and dragged her toward the fire. Adana struggled, but grief and hunger had made her light, and McKenna, fueled by something black and ancient, was strong. The world spun. The smoke, the red moon, the roaring anger, and then pain, searing and pure, consumed everything. McKenna shoved her down into the pit, and the cooking fire leapt up as if hungry for her flesh. The flames kissed Adana's cheek first, greedy and cruel, searing her skin, tangling in her hair. She screamed, a sound ripped not from her throat but from her very soul, and scrambled out, but not before the fire had marked her, claimed a piece of her bright spirit as its own. The villagers came running, but by the time they arrived, McKenna was weeping crocodile tears, crying out that it was an accident, that Adana had slipped. Obi, seeing his daughter's scorched skin and terrified eyes, felt something inside him crack, but the web McKenna had woven was strong, and the villagers, seeing no proof of malice, murmured about bad luck, about clumsiness, about the anger of spirits. Adana sat by the river that night, trembling, the cool water failing to soothe the burn that blazed across her face and arm. She looked into the surface, into the reflection broken by her tears, and saw not the bright girl who had once dreamed of silver rivers and distant lands, but a new creature, raw and hurting. The scars were not yet fully formed, but already she could feel them etching their story into her very bones. The moon, still red, hung low and heavy above her, a silent witness to her pain. The trees whispered their sorrow. Somewhere across the river, a drum beat once, twice, a slow, sorrowful thud like the heartbeat of something dying. And yet, somewhere deeper, under the pain and betrayal, something else stirred. Something older than McKenna's hatred, stronger than fire. It whispered not of defeat but of survival. A promise that this was not the end, but the beginning of a different kind of song. The days that followed blurred into one long ache. Pain wrapped itself around Adana like a second skin, raw and unrelenting. Every breath seemed to pull at the scorched flesh of her face and shoulder, sending sharp lightning through her nerves. The healers came, murmuring low prayers and songs of mending, their hands gentle but firm as they tended her wounds. They carried with them calabashes filled with thick, golden shea butter, scooped from the groves where the trees whispered secrets to the women who knew how to listen. They smeared the butter over her burns, layering it with the cool balm of baobab oil, whose trees stood ancient and wise at the village's edge. The oil seeped slowly into her skin, easing the tightness, whispering promises of healing. Sometimes they mixed river clay into the salves, its rich scent earthy and grounding, a reminder that the land itself was fighting to pull her back into life. Each treatment was both a blessing and a curse. The salves soothed, yes, but the pain returned with each new sunrise, a stubborn reminder of the night the fire kissed her. McKenna watched from a distance, her face a careful mask of sorrow whenever others looked, but Adana could feel the satisfaction simmering beneath her gaze like embers refusing to die. Obi hovered at the edges of Adana's vision, helpless, his strong hands clenching and unclenching as if he could fight her pain with the force of his grief alone. He brought her water from the coldest part of the river, fresh fruit cut into soft pieces, cloth soaked in mint leaves to press against her fevered brow. And still the healing came slowly, a reluctant guest. Time thickened, dragging itself across her wounded body. She stayed mostly in the hut, away from the village eyes that once adored her. At night, she would hear the distant echoes of drum circles, the laughter of children, the hum of life continuing without her. The walls of her small world seemed to press inward, shrinking tighter each day, and she wondered if perhaps the fire had not only marked her skin, but her spirit as well. It was during one of these long, heavy afternoons that she finally dared to look. She asked for a bowl of water, clean and still, and when it was brought to her, she sent everyone away. Alone, she knelt before the bowl, heart pounding against her ribs like a drum caught in a wild storm. The surface trembled slightly as she leaned over it, the reflection at first soft, uncertain. Then it sharpened, and the world shifted. The face that stared back at her was not the face she remembered. The smooth, unbroken skin was gone. In its place were ridges of scar tissue, raw and angry, tracing jagged paths across her cheek and jaw. Her left eye, once framed by thick lashes, now drooped slightly where the skin had tightened. Her beauty, that effortless glow that had drawn smiles and praise, had been stripped away, replaced by a map of pain and survival. The bowl slipped from her fingers, spilling water across the packed earth floor. She did not move to retrieve it. Instead, she folded over herself, pressing her forehead to the ground, and wept. The tears came hot and fast, pulled from somewhere so deep inside her that she had not even known it existed. They soaked into the earth, each drop a tiny surrender. She cried for her lost beauty, for the stolen innocence, for the dreams she feared might now wither like plants choked by drought. She cried for the nights spent chasing the stars with her laughter, for the girl who had run barefoot through mango groves without a care in the world. There was no comfort in that moment, no whispered assurances or healing hands. Only the heavy, sacred truth of grief, raw and necessary. When the tears finally slowed, leaving her hollow and trembling, Adana stayed kneeling for a long time. Listening. Breathing. The scent of shea butter clung to her skin. The warmth of the earth pressed against her body. Somewhere outside, a bird called out, a long, mournful cry that echoed her sorrow, and something else. A thin, stubborn thread of life. Slowly she raised her head. The face that looked back at her from the muddy patch on the ground was still scarred, still broken. But it was also alive. And somewhere deep within her reflection, beneath the burns and the tears, a spark still glowed. It was small, fragile. But it was hers. At first there was pity in their eyes. Hesitant smiles, awkward greetings, the way hands twitched toward her but never quite reached. Mothers would nudge their children to her side, offering timid encouragements, but the little ones would stare wide-eyed at the new ridges that marred Adana's once flawless skin, before retreating behind their mother's wrappers. Then the whispers began. Not openly, not where Obi or the elders could hear. But Adana caught them, carried on the restless breeze that rustled the wild grasses. Words like curse and bad omen twisted themselves through the air like smoke. She heard them spoken in half-breathed sentences while she passed by the well, felt them in the silence that fell too quickly when she entered a circle of chattering women. The same people who once marveled at her beauty now lowered their gazes, muttered prayers under their breath, and pressed protective charms against their hearts when she drew near. Her friends, the girls she had braided hair with under the mango trees, raced against on market days, began to find reasons not to see her. Their mothers needed help pounding yam, the goats had wandered too far, the rain had made the roads too treacherous. Excuses piled up like dry leaves, and Adana stood among them, unseen and unclaimed. Life in the village rolled forward, heavy with the thrum of normalcy that now seemed so distant from her reach. The drums still beat at dusk, their rhythms rising into the warm night like a second heartbeat. The smell of roasting maize and spiced stew still wafted through the air. Festivals were still planned, marriages still arranged, babies still wrapped in vibrant cloth and paraded proudly through the square. Life went on, vibrant and unyielding, but it went on without her. Adana found herself drawn to the baobab tree, that ancient sentinel standing at the heart of Mbale like a grandfather watching over countless generations. Its roots curled deep into the earth, its branches reaching wide into the sky, a bridge between worlds. She would sit at its base for hours, her back against the rough bark, her eyes tracing the cracks and whorls in the wood, finding shapes and faces hidden in its massive trunk. There, at least, the tree did not turn away. It bore its own scars, carved deep by storms and time, and yet it stood. Perhaps that was why she sought its shade, because it knew something of endurance. She watched the village from her silent throne, invisible yet witnessing everything. Lovers sneaking glances. Mothers weaving baskets, their fingers flying in practiced rhythm. Boys chasing goats with wild shouts of laughter. She could almost reach out and touch the pulse of life that had once beat within her, but it slipped through her fingers like mist. Sometimes a child, too young to have been taught fear, would wander close to her resting place. Their wide, curious eyes would study her face and Adana would smile, small, shy, the way one offers a hand to a stray dog. Sometimes the children smiled back before a parent snatched them away, scolding softly, casting Adana an apologetic glance heavy with shame. McKenna moved through it all untouched, her beauty a shield against suspicion. Her hips swayed with pride as she laughed among the market women, her voice dripping with concern whenever she spoke of poor Adana's tragic accident. No one dared confront her, and even if they had, who would they believe? The lovely, grieving wife? Or the scarred girl whose presence seemed to chill the very air? Obi remained Adana's only lifeline. He sat with her often under the baobab, weaving simple baskets in silence, his rough fingers clumsy but determined. He told her stories still, though his voice carried a sadness that once had no place in his tales. Stories of heroes who were broken and yet still rose. Of rivers that bent around mountains rather than breaking against them. He did not touch her face when he spoke, did not force his comfort upon her. He simply sat beside her, a steady flame refusing to be snuffed out. And yet, even Obi's love could not shield her completely from the loneliness that seeped into her bones. It was a quiet kind of exile. No stones thrown, no angry mobs. Just the slow closing of doors, the steady dimming of smiles, the silent reshaping of a world that no longer had a place for her brightness. Under the sprawling arms of the baobab, Adana listened to the wind hum through its branches, a song of sorrow and strength woven together. And she wondered, as the stars blinked into the evening sky one by one, whether somewhere out there her future still waited, hidden beyond the horizon she had once dreamed of reaching. The announcement came on a breathless afternoon, when the air hung heavy with the scent of ripening guavas and the hum of cicadas cloaked the village in lazy music. A messenger arrived, draped in fine blue cloth and riding a horse so glossy it seemed spun from Black River stones. The children ran after him, shouting with glee, while the elders gathered in the meeting square, their faces a blend of curiosity and suspicion. When the village chief raised his staff for silence, the messenger's voice rose strong and clear. Prince Obesai, heir to the great kingdom beyond the Silver Hills, would soon come of age. As tradition demanded, he would choose his queen from among the maidens of the neighboring villages. A festival of drums would be held, 3 days and 3 nights of music, dance and celebration, and from the gathered daughters the prince's heart would find its match. Excitement rolled through Mbale like a thunderclap. The women broke into animated chatter, hands flying to their hair to pat and adjust, minds already racing with plans. The men grinned and boasted, declaring that no village would present maidens more beautiful or talented than theirs. Even the smallest children knew what this meant. A chance for glory, for alliance, for stories that would be told for generations. Preparations began at once. Looms clattered to life as deft fingers wove brilliant fabrics dyed with indigo, saffron, and deep crimson. The scent of spices filled the air, cinnamon, cloves, peppercorns ground by mortar and pestle, releasing warm clouds of fragrance. Women spent hours by the river, oiling and braiding their daughters' hair, twisting it into intricate patterns like woven dreams. Anklets were polished to gleaming brightness, necklaces of coral and bone were rest-rung, and songs new and old filled the air as the village transformed itself into a place fit for royalty. Adana watched it all from her quiet place beneath the baobab tree. A strange ache grew inside her, something both sharp and tender. Once, not long ago, she would have been at the center of the flurry, her friends teasing her about which bright rapper would suit her best, her father humming songs to match the drums that would soon beat through the nights. She would have run through the fields gathering wildflowers to weave into her hair, her heart light and full of dreams. But now she stayed apart, a quiet ghost in the midst of all the color and laughter. And yet, despite the whispered fears and the scars she bore like a second skin, a part of her still dared to dream. Late at night, when the world slept and the stars blinked their ancient songs across the sky, Adana would close her eyes and imagine it. She would see herself stepping into the square, clothed in colors so bright they rivaled the sun. She would feel the drums vibrating through her bones, lifting her feet, spinning her into a dance that spoke of joy and sorrow and hope all at once. And in the crowd, she imagined the prince's eyes finding hers, not in pity, not in horror, but in wonder. As if he could see beyond the scars to the fire still burning inside her. But when she opened her eyes, reality pressed heavy against her chest. She saw the way the village girls avoided her glance, heard the way the elders' voices grew quiet when she passed. Dreams, she reminded herself bitterly, were for girls whose faces had not been kissed by fire. Still, she could not help but listen to the preparations with her heart straining against her ribs. She gathered fragments of songs as she passed the courtyard, her fingers tracing the soft edge of a discarded ribbon she dared not pick up. The drums had not yet begun, but already she could hear them in her blood, a low steady call she could not silence. Obi, sensing her turmoil without needing words, sat beside her one evening as the first stars stitched themselves into the indigo sky. He said nothing at first, only offered her a piece of cloth he had traded for, a deep green wrapper embroidered with tiny gold fish that seemed to leap and swim when the fabric moved. "For the festival," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion he could not hide. Adana's fingers closed around the cloth, feeling the weight of it, the beauty. Tears stung the edges of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She said nothing then, but deep inside her, something began to shift. A trembling hope, fragile but growing stronger with each beat of the invisible drums. Maybe the world had turned its back on her. Maybe beauty, as the village once understood it, had been stripped away. But perhaps there was another kind of beauty, one that could not be burned away. One that danced to the rhythm of a heart that refused to stop dreaming. And maybe, just maybe, the Festival of Drums would not pass her by after all. The night before the Festival of Drums, when the village was drunk on anticipation and the fires burned high and bright, Adana slipped away. She moved quietly through the shadows, the green cloth from Obi wrapped carefully around her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from a feeling she could not yet name, a feeling that pulled her deeper into the embrace of the forest. The path grew wilder as she left the fields behind. Trees arched overhead like ancient sentinels, their thick branches weaving a canopy that drank the moonlight whole. The air was cool and damp, filled with the rich smell of moss and earth. Somewhere, a night bird called, low and mournful, and the sound curled around her like a whispered invitation. She did not know why her feet carried her forward, only that they must. The villagers spoke in hushed voices of the forest mother, a woman both feared and revered, who lived beyond the reach of the village drums. Some said she was a spirit, others a witch, and still others claimed she was simply a woman whom the world had wounded and who had learned to wield that pain into something more powerful. The ground softened beneath Adana's bare feet as she reached a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a small hut built of woven reeds and vines. Smoke rose in delicate tendrils from its thatched roof, and the scent of burning herbs filled the clearing with a sweet, heady perfume. Sitting before the hut, her milky eyes unseeing yet piercing, was Nia. Her skin was the deep, rich brown of earth after rain, her hair threaded with silver beads that chimed softly when she moved. She wore a simple robe of woven flax, but around her neck hung an amulet carved from bone, shaped like a crescent moon. She turned her face toward Adana, and though her eyes saw nothing of this world, Adana felt as though her soul had been laid bare. "You have come," Nia said, her voice low and musical like a drumbeat heard through the ground. The girl marked by fire, carrying a heart still burning. Adana knelt without thinking, her body folding with a grace born of respect and awe. "I don't know why," she whispered. "You seek," Nia replied simply. "You seek what was never truly lost." Without another word, Nia reached behind her and drew forth something wrapped in leaves. She unrolled it carefully, reverently, until the clearing shimmered with reflected light. It was a dress, unlike anything Adana had ever seen. The fabric seemed woven from strands of silver moonlight, caught between layers of river glass, each thread glistening as if it had been plucked from the surface of the water itself. The garment shimmered with hidden colors, soft and shifting like the inside of a seashell. "This," Nia said, "is for you." Adana hesitated, staring at the dress as if it might vanish at any moment. "I cannot wear that," she breathed. "I am broken." Nia's laughter was rich and deep, echoing through the trees. "Broken?" she echoed. "Child, even the river is broken by stones, and yet it finds its way. Even the baobab bears the scars of lightning, and yet it grows taller than all others." She placed a hand over Adana's scarred cheek, her fingers light but firm. "Your scars are not curses," she said. "They are songs your spirit survived to sing. Wear them. Wear this. And let the world see." With trembling hands, Adana accepted the dress. As she pulled it over her head, it settled against her skin like a blessing. It was cool and soft, and where it touched her scars, it did not sting or shy away. It embraced her fully without fear or pity. Nia guided her to the center of the clearing, where a circle of white stones had been laid. From a pouch at her waist, Nia scattered herbs into the fire, and a sweet, pungent smoke rose up, curling around Adana's body. "Close your eyes," Nia commanded, and Adana obeyed. The night fell away. In the darkness behind her lids, visions unfurled, images that shimmered and danced just out of reach. She saw her mother, young and laughing, twirling beneath the mango trees. She saw her father's strong hands braiding a crown of flowers. She saw ancestors she had never met, their faces radiant with pride. She saw the fire, yes, but also the hands that had lifted her from it, the healers, the river, the tree. She saw herself not as the world now saw her, but as she truly was, fierce, unbroken, shining. A chant rose up around her, words in a language older than memory. Nia's voice and another, until it seemed the whole forest sang to her. They sang of pain endured, of trials overcome, of the strength hidden in softness, the fire hidden in scars. When Adana opened her eyes, the clearing seemed brighter, as though the very stars had drawn closer to bear witness. She stood taller now, her shoulders no longer weighed down by shame. The dress shimmered with her every movement, but it was her spirit that truly glowed. Nia smiled, a deep, knowing curve of her lips. "Go," she said. "The drums call for you. Go and show them the girl who could not be burned away." Adana bowed low, gratitude swelling in her chest until she thought it might burst. She turned from the clearing, the sacred cloth whispering against her skin, and began the walk back toward the village. Each step felt lighter, as though she were shedding old skins, old sorrows, leaving them behind in the sacred earth. The festival of drums awaited, and Adana would meet it not as the broken girl the village had tried to forget, but as something new, something forged by fire, blessed by spirits, and stitched together with threads of the moon itself. At first light, Adana set out. The village still slept, curled under the quilt of lingering dreams, unaware that one of its daughters was slipping away toward destiny. She moved quickly, her bare feet whispering against the packed earth, the dress of moon thread and river glass tucked safely beneath a simple wrapper to shield it from jealous eyes. Ahead lay the royal village, a distance that would take her through thick forests, over rivers that pulsed with unseen life, across plains where the wind spoke in tongues only the wild things understood. She carried no weapons, no food but a few yams tucked into a cloth bundle, no companions but the scars that marked her and the stubborn hope burning quietly inside her. The forest swallowed her by midday. Towering trees nodded together overhead, their limbs heavy with vines and the chittering of unseen creatures. The ground was a tangle of roots and fallen leaves slick with decay. Every so often, a rustle in the underbrush sent her heart leaping into her throat. A mongoose, perhaps, or something larger, something hungrier. Still Adana pressed on. The path was not kind. Hunger gnawed at her stomach until the yams were gone, and even then she rationed each bite with the careful reverence of a priestess offering sacrifice. Her mouth grew dry, her limbs heavy, but she remembered Nia's words, the chants that had spun her spirit into steel. Every step forward was a step closer to the life she had dreamed of beyond the edge of Mbale's fields. At night, she camped beneath the tangled arms of trees, her head resting against roots that pulsed with ancient memory. The sounds of the forest grew louder under the cover of darkness. Owls hooted, monkeys barked, and somewhere hippos grunted, their voices deep and booming like the drums that had once called her to dance. The river crossings were the hardest. The first river was shallow but swift, its waters dragging at her ankles with eager fingers. She picked her way carefully across, using slippery stones as stepping stools. Once she slipped, plunging knee-deep into the chill, gasping as the current tried to snatch her away. But she dug her toes into the mud and fought her way free, panting with the effort. The second river was wider and lazier, but it seethed with hidden dangers. Hippos, massive and territorial, bellowed from the shadows, their blunt teeth flashing white in the moonlight. Crocodiles too, silent and patient, lurked beneath the surface. Adana waited until twilight, when the creatures were least active, and crossed in the shallows, the water rising to her waist, her heart a frantic drum inside her chest. On the far bank she collapsed into the grass, her breath ragged but victorious. The stars above blinked approval, or so she chose to believe. Loneliness walked beside her now, a heavier burden than hunger or fear. There were moments when she almost turned back, when the forest seemed endless and the darkness inside her whispered that no prince, no festival, no dream was worth this journey. Who was she after all? Just a scarred girl dressed in borrowed magic, chasing a future that perhaps had never truly belonged to her. But in those moments, when despair licked at her heels like hungry flames, she would feel it, the heat of her own scars. Not a burning, not the raw agony of McKenna's cruelty, but a warmth, steady and bright, radiating from the marks she carried. They glowed in her mind's eye, tiny embers stitched across her skin, lighting her path when all else seemed lost. She was no longer the Adana who had hidden by the baobab, who had watched life pass her by with silent tears. She was something forged in fire, tempered by loneliness, sharpened by survival. One night, as she huddled beneath a tree twisted into shapes by the wind, she dreamed. She saw herself standing on a vast plain, the stars so close she could pluck them from the sky. Her scars blazed across her skin like constellations, and the ancestors circled her, humming songs of victory. In their eyes she saw not pity, not sorrow, but pride. When she awoke, the dream clung to her, stronger than the hunger gnawing at her belly, fiercer than the tiredness weighing down her bones. She rose, shaking leaves from her hair, and pressed onward. The trees began to thin by the third day, and the air grew sweeter, laced with the distant scents of roasting meats and perfumed oils. She knew then that she was close. The royal village awaited, draped in music and gold, its heart pounding with the festival of drums. Adana quickened her pace, her feet bruised but determined. Each step was a prayer, each breath a promise. She had crossed rivers, braved beasts, stared into the face of her own brokenness and refused to yield. The girl who emerged from the forest into the golden light of the festival grounds was no longer simply Adana of Mbale. She was Adana of the scars, Adana of the burning heart, Adana who had walked through the dark and carried her own light. And she was ready. The royal village rose before her like a mirage, shimmering under the heavy kiss of the sun. Sprawled across the hills and valleys, it was a place woven from dreams. High walls crafted from sun-baked clay, rooftops thatched with gold-dusted grasses, and colorful banners flapping proudly in the wind, stitched with symbols of kingdoms long forgotten. The festival of drums was in full bloom. Adana stepped into a tide of music and color that seemed to lift her off her weary feet and carry her forward. The air thrummed with the deep, living sound of chorus and balafons, the twang and boom weaving together in a tapestry of joy. Drummers in red and gold pounded out ancient rhythms, their hands blurs against the stretched skins, calling everyone to dance, to celebrate, to remember. Golden masks, carved into fierce lions and wise gazelles, glittered from every corner. Women moved like living rivers in indigo-dyed robes that shimmered with hidden patterns, their necks heavy with beads and copper coils. The scent of roasting meats, peppery stews, and sweet ground nuts hung thick in the air, wrapping Adana in a dizzying embrace. It was breathtaking and terrifying. Among the sea of vibrant beauty, Adana felt the weight of 1,000 eyes fall on her. She heard the murmurs first, whispers sliding like knives across her back, laughter hidden behind beaded veils. Girls with smooth skin and braided crowns stole glances at her, their eyes flickering between pity and mockery. "She dares to come here?" one voice hissed low. "She thinks the prince will look at her?" another laughed, harsh and cold. Adana straightened her spine. She adjusted the folds of her dress, feeling the fabric of moon thread and river glass catch the light, casting tiny rainbows against the dust at her feet. The scars across her face and arms no longer felt like chains dragging her down. They felt like armor forged in the hottest flame. She would not shrink, not today. With every step, she called up the memory of her journey, the river she had crossed, the forest she had braved, the nights she had spent alone under indifferent stars. She carried all of it within her now, stitched into her bones. She had earned her place here whether they saw it or not. And someone did see. From the shadow of a grand pavilion draped in silk, Prince Obasai watched. He was a striking figure even from a distance, dressed in flowing robes the deep blue of twilight, his head crowned with a simple circlet of hammered gold. His posture was regal, effortless, as if the earth itself bent subtly to his will. Yet his eyes, dark and sharp, did not skim over Adana the way others did. He watched her with an intensity that lit his face from within, as if he saw not the scars that marred her skin, but the light that shone from inside her. Adana felt the weight of his gaze, though she dared not meet it directly. A flush crept up her neck, both frightening and exhilarating. She moved carefully through the crowd, her every motion a quiet defiance, a poem written in steps and lifted chin. Around her the competition buzzed like angry bees. The other girls sparkled in their finest, their bodies draped in cloth so fine it caught the breeze like smoke. Their faces were painted with the careful precision of artists, cheeks dusted with ground pearl, lips stained with crushed hibiscus. They danced in the open squares, they laughed loudly, they flaunted their beauty as one might brandish a sword. Adana, by contrast, danced alone near the edge of the festivities, letting the music flow through her not as a performance, but as a truth. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like the river carving its way through stone. She danced not to be chosen, but because she remembered what it was to be alive. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky into a canvas of gold and blood. Fires were lit in towering braziers, sending pillars of smoke spiraling into the twilight. Somewhere a horn sounded, a deep, commanding note that silenced even the boldest laughter. The prince would soon walk among them to choose. Adana's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face serene. She adjusted the folds of her dress once more, letting the silver threads catch the firelight, turning her into something half earth, half star. She was ready. She had to be. And if the others sneered, if the world whispered behind cupped hands, let them. She had survived fire. She had survived abandonment. She had crossed the wilderness with nothing but hope stitched into her heart. If this too would be a battle, then Adana would meet it the way she had met every trial before. Not with bitterness, not with rage, but with the fierce, quiet dignity of one who knew her worth could not be measured by smooth skin or unblemished smiles. In the distance, drums rumbled low, growing louder with each heartbeat. The moment was near. And Adana stood, unshaken, as the future came to find her. The horn's low call faded into a heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire pits. Every girl straightened, every face brightened with a forced, desperate radiance. The moment had come, the choosing was at hand. Prince Obesai stepped forward from the pavilion, the twilight catching in the folds of his robe like liquid midnight. His walk was unhurried, each step deliberate, almost reverent. He was a man carrying the weight of a kingdom's dreams on his shoulders, but tonight, there was something else in his eyes, a hunger not for power but for something real, something rare. He walked among the girls, his gaze lingering here and there but never for long. Some curtsied low, their smiles trembling with anticipation. Others fluttered their lashes, whispered blessings under their breath. Yet Obesai moved past them all, his steps drawing him inevitably toward the edge of the crowd, toward the girl who stood half in shadow, her scars catching the firelight like sacred runes. Adana felt the world narrow until there was nothing but the prince's steady gaze and the deafening rush of her own heartbeat. She dared not hope. And yet, he stopped before her. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the drums seemed to falter. Obesai extended his hand. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but to the watching villagers it cracked through the air like a thunderclap. A prince, offering his hand to a girl marred by fire? Eyes widened. Whispers sparked like dry leaves catching flame. Adana hesitated, her fingers trembling at her sides. But she remembered the journey, the pain, the strength that had carried her across forests and rivers. She lifted her chin and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, sure, and respectful. Without a word, he led her into the clearing at the heart of the festival. The villagers parted like the Red Sea before them, stunned into a silence so deep it seemed even the stars above leaned in closer to listen. The drums resumed, slow and deep, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Obesai bowed slightly, a smile touching his lips, not the smirk of someone amused by charity, but the smile of a man who had found something precious and was honored by its presence. Adana dipped her head in return, her heart hammering so wildly she thought she might faint. Yet her body moved with a grace born of survival, a fluid poetry etched into her very bones. They danced. Not the rigid, practiced steps of court dances, but something older, wilder. A dance that belonged to the ancestors, to the rivers and the winds. Their feet barely touched the ground, their bodies swaying, spinning, flowing as if carried by an unseen current. And as they moved, Prince Obesai spoke, his voice a low murmur meant only for her ears. "Tell me," he said, "of the fire." At first, shame rose like a bitter flood within her. The old fear that her scars were too ugly, her story too painful, choked her. But the way he held her gaze, steady, unflinching, gave her courage. She told him. In halting words she spoke of McKenna's hatred, of the fire pit's cruel bite, of the nights spent weeping into the earth. She spoke of loneliness, of the way the villagers had turned their faces from her, of the journey through the wilds to stand here now. Obesai listened as if each word was a jewel to be treasured. He asked no foolish questions, made no clumsy reassurances. He simply listened, his hand firm in hers, his steps never faltering. When her voice finally fell silent, trembling at the edges, he drew her closer. Around them, the villagers stared, their mouths open, their minds struggling to grasp what they were witnessing. A prince, dancing not with flawless beauty but with battered strength. A prince, captivated not by golden skin, but by the fire inside a broken girl. Then came the moment. Under the fierce light of the festival fires, Obesai raised his free hand and brushed his fingers lightly across Adana's scarred cheek. His touch was feather-soft, reverent, as if he were touching a sacred relic. Adana froze, her breath caught in her throat. And then, he leaned in and pressed a kiss, light as a sigh, to the ruined skin. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Some clutched their chests. Others turned away as if unable to bear the raw tenderness of the act. Mothers pulled their daughters closer. Elders shook their heads in disbelief. But beneath the shock, something deeper stirred, something ancient, buried beneath centuries of fear and superstition. It washed over the villagers in a slow rolling tide, eroding their prejudice, softening their hardened hearts. Here was their prince, untouched by their narrow visions, finding beauty where they had seen only ruin. Here was love, pure and defiant, unchained from the shallow standards they had clung to for generations. Adana blinked back tears. Not tears of sorrow but of something richer, acceptance, hope, a fierce, trembling joy. Obesai stepped back slightly, his hand still cradling her face, his eyes shining with a pride that was hers to claim. "You are the bravest soul I have ever known," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing like a blessing. "And it is your spirit, not your skin, that I wish beside me." The drums swelled again, no longer pounding for tradition's sake, but singing a new song, one of rebirth, of courage, of love that danced defiantly in the face of a broken world. Adana smiled through her tears, the scars on her face pulling with the unfamiliar shape of happiness. For the first time since the fire, she felt truly seen, not as a wounded girl to be pitied, but as a woman of fire and survival and boundless worth. And under the blaze of 100 torches, before a village that would never again be quite the same, she danced, not alone, not ashamed, but loved. The wedding of Adana and Prince Obesai was unlike any the kingdom had ever known. There were no heavy crowns or stiff ceremonies locking them into duty. Instead, there was music that seemed to rise from the earth itself, old songs carried on the wind, drums that beat like hearts in love. Villagers traveled for days to witness the union. Some came out of guilt, some out of awe, and some simply because they had heard of the girl who bore her scars like gold. The palace grounds bloomed with woven banners of every color. Great fires lit the sky until the stars themselves seemed dim beside the glow. When Adana walked through the palace gates, the people gasped, not because they pitied her but because she was radiant. She wore a dress spun from moon thread and river glass, a gift from Nia, the forest mother. Each step she took was a prayer, a blessing, a revolution. Her scars shimmered under the sun, living proof that broken things could shine brighter than those never touched by flame. Obesai waited at the altar, his smile stretching wide and unguarded, his love not hidden behind tradition but offered openly like a gift. When they joined hands, it was not just two lives intertwining, it was a promise that the old ways, the ways of fear and shame, would break and scatter like dry leaves in a storm. They danced as husband and wife beneath the open sky, the firelight curling around them, the drums thundering like the heartbeat of a world newly born. But Adana had not walked so far only to disappear into palace walls. From the first days of her queenship, she made it known. She would be a queen not of marble and gold but of earth and hands and hearts. She would sit not only on a throne but beneath the great baobab tree where she once wept. Her court would be open not only to nobles but to the broken, the forgotten, the ones who carried their own invisible fires inside. She called her sanctuary the House of New Dawn. It rose just beyond the palace gardens, built with her own hands alongside masons, healers, and weavers. The doors were wide enough for anyone who could walk, crawl, or limp through them. The walls were decorated not with silk but with murals painted by the scarred and the bruised, vivid scenes of survival, dreams, rebirth. There were no mirrors inside the House of New Dawn. Only pools of water, where reflections rippled and shimmered and could not trap anyone into one fixed image of themselves. No one was asked to explain their wounds unless they wished to. No one was shamed for their pain. Here, scars were not hidden, they were honored. Women with acid burns, boys who had survived attacks by wild beasts, elders marked by war, all came. And with each visitor, Adana wove a new thread into the great tapestry of healing that covered the sanctuary's walls. It became a living thing, a breathing map of courage. She walked among them not as queen but as sister, healer, witness. Word spread across kingdoms. Foreign travelers journeyed across deserts and mountains to see the queen who danced with scars. Some came hoping for miracles, some came seeking only to be seen. All left carrying a spark of the fire she had refused to let die. Years passed. The mango trees bore heavier fruit, their branches weighed down with golden abundance. The river sang louder in the rainy season. The palace grew more beautiful, but it was the House of New Dawn that the people loved most fiercely. And always there was the griot. Each season, the storyteller would gather the children of the village under the old baobab tree. They would come running with their knees scraped and their eyes wide with the raw hunger of youth. The griot's voice, rough as bark yet rich as honey, would rise into the dusk, weaving the old tales into the air like magic. He would begin as always with the same words. Long ago, in a time when beauty was prized more than courage, when smooth skin was mistaken for a pure heart, there lived a girl whose face was kissed by fire. The children would lean in breathless. He would tell them of Adana's laughter that once danced higher than the mango trees, of the stepmother with the beautiful face and the soul of ashes, of the fire that tried to claim Adana, but failed, of the prince who looked beyond the flesh and found the gold hidden beneath the burns, and of the queen who built a home where the broken mended one another with hands made strong by love. The children would listen, their young faces glowing with wonder. They would run their fingers over the faded scars on their own knees and elbows, wondering for the first time if maybe, just maybe, every mark they carried was a story waiting to be told. Under the stars, the griot would end, voice soft but sure. A scar is not a shame. It is a memory of survival. And those who carry them are the bravest of us all. And in the palace gardens, far beyond the circle of firelight, Queen Adana would sometimes sit quietly, listening, her heart a steady drum of gratitude. She had crossed fire. She had crossed loneliness. She had crossed fear itself. Now she lived in the place beyond burning, where every scar shone like a star. And her story would never, ever be forgotten.